So Pastor Chris is away today, and I mainly say that to anybody that might be tuning in online for the first time. I am not a pastor. I'm not a preacher, and if you're tuning in for the first time, I hope you'll come back online when Chris is here, and you get a chance to hear the message that he's been given. So whatever you get today, don't judge it till you come back and at least hear Chris. In the current series of sermons from Pastor Chris, he's been talking about words and how they matter. And the series before that was on what the world says and what God says and how they differ. And in preparing for this message today, a phrase popped into my head and it seemed to tie the two together. It's an idiom that pertains to words and speaking, but the world seems to think of it differently than how I believe it was intended. So I thought for today we could look at a phrase about words and how the world interprets it and how we should interpret it. The phrase is, do as I say, not as I do. It's a very old phrase. In the process of researching it, I discovered it can be traced back verbatim to John Selden in a book he wrote in 1654. And he was actually talking about preachers when he was talking about it. However, in the 12th century, about 600 years earlier, the Anglo-Saxons had a saying that went something like this: although I do worse than I teach you, do not do as I do, but do as I teach you, if I teach you well. I can see why that phrase didn't exactly catch on. I think we can all, that doesn't really roll off the tongue all that well. But it actually goes back much further than that, all the way back to the book of Matthew in chapter 23, when Jesus said to the crowd and to his disciples, "The teachers of the law and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat, so you should be careful to do everything they tell you, but do not do what they do, for they do not practice what they preach." Do as I say, not as I do. And I didn't realize how hard that image was going to be to read till I put it up there, but you can dwell on it if you can see it, and if not, when you get home, you can look it up again and see. But the world has distorted the meaning of this idiom, and it's become a way for us to excuse ourselves or justify an action that we've taken that we know we shouldn't have taken. We are loath to admit we can be hypocrites, or at the very least hypocritical. And when caught in a hypocritical conundrum, the world says we can just lean on this little token. And instead of acknowledging and repenting and correcting, we can just smile a slightly embarrassed or perhaps a snarky smile and say, well, you know, you should just do as I say, not as I do. I want to look at a couple of situations that we might find ourselves in that might cause us to prop up on this little pseudo-sanctimonious morsel. Scenario one is parenthood. Think of all the rules parents set for their children. Don't eat snacks before supper. That's a good one. And we tell our children, don't eat anything before supper or you'll ruin your appetite, spoil your dinner, something bad's going to happen. Then we start preparing supper. The pasta's reached boiling and we've turned it down. The sauce is simmering on low. Everything's on autopilot. And what do we reach for? Chips or nuts or some other little snack. And then, mid-crunch, we hear that little voice. But I thought you said we shouldn't eat snacks before supper. Uh-oh. We've been caught. What do? This looks like a job for super idiom. We look down and say, well, you should do as I do, and you should do as I say, not as I do. And it feels kind of good. We're a little bit satisfied. They're a little bit confused, but it's a nicely placed idiom. Then there's scenario two, and I think this is a worse scenario because in this case, there's no opportunity for dialogue. It's the old, I hope nobody saw me do that routine. For example, a teacher or a retired teacher might tell their students that when they're walking down the hall and they see trash, they should pick it up, even if it's not theirs. But one day, while the teacher is walking down the hall, seemingly alone and unwatched, he sees a plastic, sticky ice cream tub with one of those tiny wooden spoons mortared to the side of it, laying in the middle of the hall. And he deliberately decides not to pick it up. Unbeknownst to him, someone has turned the corner of the hallway behind him, and now they've seen the hypocrite in action. He doesn't even get a chance to say, well, you should still do as I say, not as I do. His words, conflicting with his actions, have chiseled an image into the mind of the unseen witness. The world lets us off easy. The world is much more tolerant of hypocrisy and more apt to encourage us to fall back on this idiom rather than try to refrain from being hypocritical. The world says it's okay to be a hypocrite. It's okay to say one thing and do another. But what does the Bible say about it? Matthew 7, verse 5 says, "You hypocrite, first take the log out of your own eye, and then you'll see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye." And Matthew 15, 7 and 9 says, "You hypocrites, well did Isaiah prophesy of you when he said, 'This people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men.'" And the last one I picked is from Titus, chapter 1, 16, and it says, "They profess to know God, but they deny him by their works. They are detestable, disobedient, unfit for any good work." Well, I guess you figured out by now the world's interpretation ain't exactly right. It's actually exactly wrong. Jesus said, "Do as they say," because what they were saying was right. He said, "Do not do what they do," because what they were doing was wrong. "Do as I say, not as I do," is not an excuse that we can deploy in order to simplify our life, satisfy our greed, clear our conscience, or dissolve us of responsibility. If we find ourselves having to say, "Do as I say, not as I do," then we may have a problem. Just try to reconcile two phrases: "Do as I say, not as I do," with "actions speak louder than words." The fact is that on a Christian walk, both are equally important. You have to say what should be said and then do what should be done. That's what separates us from the Pharisees Jesus was talking about. We need to ask God for the words that need to be spoken. We need to ask God for the work that needs to be done. We need to speak out of love. We need to do out of love. "Do as I say and do as I do" should be the motto we strive for. We let ourselves off too easily if we decide that what we do isn't as important as what we say. So what should we say when we're caught being hypocritical and not practicing what we preach? Well, we could say thank you to whomever has called us out. Something like, "Oh my goodness, you are absolutely right. I should not be snacking before supper. Thank you for reminding me. I will put these away right now, and in the future, try to follow my own advice a little better." The problem with that is, it doesn't sound like it tastes too good. Sounds like a bitter pill. But it could be worse, because you might even need to say the S word, sorry. You know, something like, "I'm sorry, you're right. I shouldn't have walked past that trash. I know I've even punished you for things similar. And I understand it isn't easy to get it right every time. I will try to do better and be a better example for you to follow. Wow. Bitter and sour. Another bad flavor combo. We need to own our failures. We first need to do it for our own benefit. When we go to God and ask for forgiveness, we're owning a failure. And for the benefit of those who watch us and hopefully want to emulate us. They need to know that we know we messed up. They don't know it if we don't own it. They need to know that we want to reconcile our actions with our words and our words with our actions. And they need to know that we don't want to be hypocrites, even though sometimes we do hypocritical things, and that acting in a hypocritical way is wrong. Own it, ask for forgiveness, give it to God, do it better next time. Rinse and repeat. But if you're doing it right, the intervals in between will gradually become further and further apart. It is a horrible feeling when we recognize our actions fall short of God's expectations. The embarrassment and the shame, they're only multiplied when we're caught by someone else. And embarrassment and shame can be coupled with anger and frustration when the person who catches us is delighted to have caught us in such a state of hypocrisy. It can just make you mad that you got caught and they know it. They were just waiting for you to slip up. If we feel bad because we've let God down, let ourselves down, let those we love down, because our words and actions haven't been jiving, that's good. We should feel bad. It means that the Holy Spirit is working in us to get our words and actions aligned. The good news is we can start over, completely from scratch. Yesterday, a hypocrite. Today, a hypocrite no more. Until we mess up again. But the more we work at it, the better we get at it. Eventually, our failures will be surpassed by successes until we begin to find success is the new normal. Eventually, we'll be saying, do it like I did it because I heard God saying it and I acted accordingly. Show the world what it means to be a Christian, so they will want to listen to and have reason to believe that what we have to say is the life-changing message of salvation and not just dribblings from a world-warped idiom.